My guest today is Cliff Bryanton.
Well, I would like to start off by introducing alternative energy, and I've called it a struggle for reality. And that's exactly what this is about, to address all of the spin and propaganda and focus on reality. We cannot afford the price of fantasy. So to start off, I would introduce you to Alberta, where I hail from. It's about the size of Texas and one of the top 5 petroleum reservoirs in the world, as well as the top 5 coal reservoirs in the world. We are the breadbasket of Canada and produce with over 70% of the productive land and croplands. And we are snuggled up against the Rocky Mountains. But we are the sunniest and windiest part of Canada as well, in southern Alberta here. And that means that it is very ripe for alternative energy. By 2030, we can expect 1 million acres of some under glass and populated by turbines. So that's substantial, and it's not trivial anymore. We need to know what we're doing and what the impact is going to be. Because we are the sunniest part of Canada, we also have by far the most greenhouses and produce the vegetables 12 months of the year for the prairie region. So let's talk about what I'm not going to talk about, and I'm not going to discuss climate change. Or I don't think I can add anything to that, and the carbon dioxide issue. The only thing I can add is that with our greenhouses, every one of them crank up the carbon dioxide to improve their plant growth by 2 or 3 times. And that's not ideology, that's commercial enterprise. So that's what I'm not going to talk about. I'm going to focus in on electricity. So alternative energy is also referred to by every one of these, depending upon the spin you want to put on it. And everyone has a little bit of truth, and everyone has a little bit of propaganda. For example, they call it unreliables. If it were reliable, we would still be using sailing ships. So my agenda today is to start off with an understanding of traditional electricity, because there's so many misconceptions out there. And we use the terms when we talk about the alternatives. So we need that foundational understanding. We will do wind, solar, gas, and storage, do a wrap up, net zero discussion, and around the world. My terms: energy, the ability to make a change, here, there, hot, cold, etc. Power, the rate of that change. And then we get into electrical terms like the grid or pool. It's called the grid because it is an interconnection of high-line conductors that are the interface between the generators and the distribution. And it's a pool because what happens at one end happens at the other. It's a constant fixed level throughout the grid. And also any energy in the grid is indistinguishable from all of the other energy. So whether it is solar or coal-fired, once it gets to the grid, it's part of the pool. Capacity factor. This is a factor that is critical to the understanding of alternative energies. So if you went to a car salesman, he might tell you that this car has 100 horsepower. What does that mean? That means in the shop, specifically, that engine can produce 100 horsepower under optimum conditions. But once it's in the drivetrain, you could maybe expect quite a bit less, maybe 80 horsepower. But when you're driving it, you very rarely achieve that 80 horsepower. So practically, you might say you might get 20 horsepower on average driving it. However, if you drive it 1 hour a day, you would then use that horsepower for less than 1%. So, although its capacity is 100 horsepower, the actual use of that is less than 1%. That's the capacity factor, the portion of the capacity that is used. The systems operator is the authority that operates and manages the grid and the pool. In Alberta, it's the Alberta Electrical Systems Operator, AESO, and you will have your own operator, systems operator, to manage your grid in your particular area. Now, I'm going to be talking about Alberta because I have all of the specifics of Alberta, and it is an example of what's happening around the world. But every particular locale will have a very particular characteristics and attributes depending upon the types of sources that are available and the types of loads that are put on it and the profile of the use of electricity. So there's not possible for me to cover the operations of the world. So I'm going to use Alberta as an example. Finally, spinning inertia. We should think of electricity as spinning mass, a sum total mass of all of the spinning generators, all of the directly coupled motors, all of the mass that's spinning in sync on time, and it has inertia. We use that inertia very, very practically, so that when you flick on a light switch, it creates drag on this spinning, and it's spinning at 60 hertz or 60 cycles a second in North America. So you put on your light switch, it creates drag on this spin, and immediately that, well, not immediately, but momentarily that picks up and is sensed, and a few seconds later, we turn on a gas valve and add torque to the spinning mass to keep the frequency at a very precise level. And that absolute balance between drag and torque has to be kept continuously 365 days a year, and then in Alberta, 120 years in operation, keeping the grid precisely balanced at every moment. So we have that 3 or 4 seconds. We need to be able to adjust the load and match the load, the torque and counter torque that you enacted by flipping that light switch. That is the bridge between those torque and counter torque is maintained by spinning inertia. Imagine trying to drive your car that every time you took off your foot off the gas, the car instantly stopped. Clearly, that would make it impossible to drive. But because your car has inertia, you can coast and maintain yourself and maintain a reasonable speed between gas and between fuel and drag on your car. Well, it's the same thing on the electrical grid, that we have this inertia that allows a few seconds between you flipping on the light and an opportunity to counterbalance that with an increasing torque. So that's spinning inertia, an absolute needed characteristic to keep the stability of the grid. So we've talked about each of these terms, and the electrical systems operator their job is to maintain a stable grid and to provide a reliable source of energy to their customers, which means that extremely tight frequency, but they also maintain the electricity market, the interchange, the buying and selling of energy to maintain that balance and do forecasts and planning. You are invited and encouraged to go to your own electrical systems operator and get the details of your particular region. So our demand load continually fluctuates up and down and generally cycles during the day. In other words, we get lows in the middle of the night and highs late in the afternoon. And it also cycles by season. This is our winter, and this is our spring when we have the least. And so over the course of our year, we get this kind of cycling and this kind of daily interchange. So this is not very much variation because we have a very heavy industrial base in Alberta. But there are regions where there are huge variations day to day with very low demand during the night and very high demand during the day. But in Alberta, this is exactly what we experience. So how does the systems operator approach this? Well, we can see that there is a certain amount of power that is continuous, that we can plan for, not just on hour by hour, but by month to month, year to year. And we might enter into a contract to provide energy for 20 years. And that is a contract that is really promised in advance. But in return for that promise, we get the cheapest possible base supply. It is the most reliable and the least cost that can possibly be provided to our grid under the particulars of your region. So that's usually coal or nuclear or hydro. So these types of sources cannot be started and stopped, and they are running full-time, continuous mode, and are not generally adjustable. So we buy that base load up front. Then we have, on top of that, the dispatchable, which essentially means the controllable portion, so that we can specifically match the load or the demand and the supply. Okay, so that is the adjustable portion, and to balance this load, and then and that dispatchable gas is determined by a market, hour by hour, buying and forecasting what we need. And this is a graph I've taken off of our ASO website, and I'm going to take you there. But this is how we would expect and anticipate the price of that pool price that on top of the base price that we've already purchased for in contract. Then on top of that, we have the system's marginal price. This is a specific top up and is moment to moment, not hour to hour. This is moment to moment. So this must be energy or generation that is standby, and it can be called upon within that 3 or 4 or 5 seconds, no more than 30 seconds, to keep our electrical grid energized. It's a top up, but it also contains the spinning reserves. This is the inertia that keeps that, allows us the time to respond to sudden changes in demand or source. So our electricity has 3 essential levels, and this is just an example. In your particular region, you might have 5, or you might have 3 different bases. All I'm doing is showing you an example, and it's important to realize that sources that worked for base cannot be used for their margin, and vice versa. And there's entirely different pricing for each. So our base could be 2 to 6 cents and contracted yearly. Our pool price contracted hourly, 10 to 50 cents. And our margin could be 0. We don't need any. Or it could be $2 a kilowatt hour. Very expensive. If we need it, we will pay whatever it takes. So, one of the things I hadn't mentioned about margin is there's an opportunity for batteries to fit in here, because they can do that momentary and very quick response to do the load matching necessary. Wind. This is a view of our Rockies and our wind turbines. As I said, we're expecting that there'll be hundreds of thousands of acres of these dotted throughout southern Alberta. And they have all of the same maladies and characteristics as any place else. The energy that we get from them are dependent upon, of course, the wind and whether or not we have demand for that energy, but mostly because of politics. It's politics that define whether or not we're going to use that wind energy. But there's a capacity factor. Wind energy is not available, it's not reliable, and it is intermittent. So the amount of energy we get from a wind turbine can vary between 25 and 40%. In Canada, it averages at 28.9% average. Less than a third of the capacity will be actually used or be available to supply. In southern Alberta, we do better than that, and we might get up into the 30s. So a third of the energy of the capacity is used. Our Canada's largest wind farm is our Black Spring Ridge, which is just down the road from me here, with 166 turbines, 9,000 acres, 300 megawatts to power 125,000 homes. This is pure fantasy and marketing. 300 megawatts is its capacity. 125,000 homes. How many homes can it supply? None. Unless you're willing to do without 2/3 of the time. So in reality, our 300 megawatts, we would only get 1/3 of that on an annual base of its capacity on an annual basis. So we look at the wind profile. This is Black Spring Ridge that we just talked about. This is one snapshot of its production. And as you can see, it rises and falls and drops to zero and picks back up again, depending on the wind. We add in McBride Lake, Wheatland, and 40 other wind farms, and we get this particular curve. And the trouble is here, in order to catch the wind, we are in the similar wind profiles all across southern Alberta. And so usually when one drops to zero, they all drop to zero. And we have to accept that. The other fallacy that is that people believe is that if they see the wind turbine rotating, it's contributing. But that's not true. The actual contribution will be variable depending upon the push of the wind and its intermittency. So this particular point in time, I would expect that wind turbine to be still continuously turning, and you cannot tell the difference by looking at it, whether it's here or there. It's turning, and it will be turning at approximately the same speed. But in order to make this work, we need a balancing generation. We need to augment those intermittents and compensate for their variability. A quick response in a few seconds, and we must have spinning reserve. It must be up and running and spinning, ready to respond to that variable energy from the turbine. They say wind is free, but there's a capacity factor, a portion of it that you're going to be able to use. And finally, there's a whole number of cost factors, most notably land. To suggest that you can get free land is a fantasy. So all of these costs come up, but some of the things that are completely ignored are royalty. If we're going to use gas, it pays a royalty to Alberta and to your state, and that royalty is used to fund the operations of your state. So there is no royalty coming from these wind turbines. There are no taxes, specific taxes to the wind, and it is a subsidy that keeps them operating. But it's politics that require it. I'm going to take you out to ASO. This is the electrical systems operator, and this is going to be real time. This is ASO's website, and you're probably not interested in Alberta's systems operator, but it's typical, and you should be able to get this information locally on your particular grid. So here we have a current load of 9.5 gigawatts and a pool price of around $30 per megawatt hour. Okay, this is real time. This is not contrived. This is not produced to make a point. This is exactly what is happening this morning. And we go to their site and we see hour by hour the pool price was marketed, and something happened here. I don't know. This is a little bit of a surprise. but it popped up to $822 for a megawatt. That is a huge price increase. Something happened. My thought would be there was this unexpected demand, or we lost a source that was a surprise, and they were willing to buy at a price that it takes to keep that balance going. This number is a surprise to me. I wasn't expecting it. It's not normal. Something happened. So I'm going to go on to the dashboard, and this is current. This is what is happening at this minute.
I'm sorry, Cliff, can I ask who's paying that 822? If you're like washing your clothes, do you have to pay that, or how's that work?
Oh, well, that is a wholesale price. So that means the systems operator, the grid, is putting out and buying that energy at that wholesale price. And that goes on to the grid. The customers would not see that particular spike. They would, but it would be incorporated in their electricity fee. So they would pay a price and get charged for energy at a predetermined rate, but that charge would include these kinds of things.
Okay.
So, yeah. So the customer pays for it, pays for all of this, but that's retail. And I'm not doing any of this in retail. I'm doing all of this in wholesale, in the utility level discussion. So the homeowner and the residential and the customer is an entirely other discussion that is maybe happen at another date. But this is about the utility and the supply and the grid management. Okay?
Okay.
So what's happening here? I talked about it, this contingency reserve. We have 474 megawatts in standby contingency reserve. This is the demand that we saw coming in, and this is the projected. And this is how we project this much, and we will buy that much based on the pool price that we need to keep that balance. So here's the pool price, modifying hour by hour to keep that balance. Here we have the generating capacity of Alberta. We have 25% currently. 25% of the possible generation capacity is wind, and 8% is solar. We have a very bright sunny day here. It's going to be quite warm. And we find 16% of Alberta's energy is coming from solar, and 18% is coming from wind. And the rest, well, we have a little bit here of hydro. Alberta does not have much hydro because of its geography. It's mostly flat, except for some mountains. And then, so at this particular moment in time, which happens to be May 6th at 10:04, we find mountain time. So this is what we have. And of course, these two contributions go up and go down. In January, we can experience weeks where we get nothing from wind and solar, even though the capacity is quite large, their contribution is zero. What does that mean? That means their entire capital cost is useless to us and cannot contribute to the grid. We must have reliable generation to supply all of the energy when we get nothing from anything else. So all of the wind turbines and the acreage under glass cannot eliminate one gas turbine. Here we have the flow in and out of Alberta. And at this particular moment in time, we're contributing 63 megawatts to Montana, 181 to BC, nothing to Saskatchewan. When we experienced in January 24, we were in a crisis. We were in a brownout. A brownout occurs when the demand is greater than the capacity. In that case, we were desperate to shut down loads and to import energy from our grids, adjacent grids, and they supplied energy to us. Certainly not out of the goodness of their heart. They charged us, and we paid for it because it was absolutely critical that we maintained our grid and avoided a blackout. And again, the system marginal price, which can vary. When we went to the blackout, we can pay 20, 30 times what our base load is, even 100 times what our base load is, just to get that marginal price and top-up price. And that is real time, what is happening at this moment. And again, there's nothing contrived here. I'm not using a specific event to make a point. I'm just showing you exactly what is happening at this particular instant in time. And I retrieve most of my slides and graphs from our ASO website. So again, to show you the reality of what is exactly going on. This is kind of a fun slide, but yeah, this is what we would experience in the winter, and nobody even bothers to clean them off because they contribute nothing in the winter. And the thought that northern Alberta, with a month of night, should go solar, it is kind of hilarious. But this is what happens with solar. Solar has an advantage over wind in that it is more predictable. In that during the summer, which we mostly get sunny days, we can expect a large contribution from solar. And if you can match the loads, the load profile matches that. For example, in Medicine Hat, it's mostly air conditioning is the heaviest load of the year. And that pretty much aligns with our solar panels. And there's a nice fit there. But that's the only real place in Alberta where we can say that. But it works. And there are lots of places around the world where that would work. And certainly if you're got a very low latitude, your solar contribution might be more predictable and more useful. So this is typical. So I'm talking about our longest days of the year, which is in June. And as you can see, even in June, on our brightest, sunnier days, we still get an intermittency that we need to accommodate. So this is kind of like you've got everything running. You've got running a factory, and you've got regular operators and regular staff, and everything seems to be going smoothly. And your boss comes along and says, there's some casuals that I want you to utilize. And you go, what? Okay. So you bring in the casuals and send out your regulars. And report back to your boss that, well, okay, I made some of them, fit some of them into our factory and use some of the casuals. But he says that's a priority. Okay, that means that you must use them instead of your regulars. But the next day, they don't show up. Well, you need that support. So you're going to have to pay standby, and you're going to have to pay for all of that help to be standing at the gate in case the casuals don't show up. And that costs, and that's additional cost to your operations. The same thing occurs with electricity. Here we have solar, but it's intermittent. We're going to have to pay standby to compensate and be ready to come in whenever they crash. So their weaknesses are long and many. I've included a few here, but they are extensive. But they have a capacity factor of 5 to 20%, and in Canada, it's 14.1%. So this is kind of like going into your grocery store and buying a bag of potatoes and being able to eat one. We should expect that in Canada, that our solar panels are not going to contribute anywhere close to their capacity. So when anybody that talks about renewables without talking capacity factor is a charlatan, because they're trying to misinform people about what they're capable of and how much they would contribute. Now, we achieve, and we need balancing generation, of course. We need that immediate response to keep our systems grid in balance. In Canada, the largest solar farm is Traverse Solar, again, just down the road from me here. 3,330 acres, 400 megawatts, they say, and 150,000 homes. And yes, the 400 megawatts is capacity, not usability. So capacity is a fantasy number with solar. It's not reality. It is if you have perfect alignment, perfect latitude, perfect, you might be able to achieve 400 megawatts. But practically here, it is pure fantasy. And we might get 100 megawatts, or you'd be able to use a quarter of that in a year, and certainly cannot supply the 150,000 homes that's marketing. And the way they calculate that is merely by taking its capacity divided by the demand of a typical home. But those two don't match, and it is not real. Solar is free, they say. Well, except for the capacity factor and the land and the panels, and again, the royalty and taxes. And how do we decommission these? We have hundreds of 1,000 acres of glass. Are we ever going to put that back into productive land or nature? So we have our sources. Gas, natural gas, which is abundant in Alberta, enough for several hundred years. It's reliable, dispatchable, It's free. All energy is free, except for what it takes to gather it and distribute it and market it. We take about a half acre per megawatt, and it has a lifespan of 50 years. It is taxed with royalties, with a 90 to 98% capacity factor, delivering energy at 2 to 20 cents. Wind, well, takes a lot more space and a lifespan of 20 years with a subsidy, etc. Much more costly, and so with solar. But with wind and solar, there's no spinning inertia. The contributions of the spinning inertia from wind and solar is very minimal. And so what that does is it makes our grid very fragile. The greater the wind and solar, the more risky our grid is and susceptible to crashing because of that imbalance between loads and sources. So each of these particular sources, traditional sources, contribute spinning reserve, but not high wind or solar. Also, there's a significant difference between the materials that are required to operate each, and that means that the more renewables that we are looking to put in place, the greater the demand for these materials, and will affect the costs, of course. We find that renewable energy has been, well, it's been promoted and subsidized, and we find that they are growing exponentially. But as we notice with hydropower, it has maxed out. It's becoming saturated. There are no big hydropower sites available, and we find them to be leveling off and even dropping. In Canada, about 60% of our homes are supplied by hydropower, but not Alberta because of its geography. We are not, that's not part of what we do have. And we find wind and solar rising exponentially, but they too will bump into that issue that it will become saturated, in that all of the most productive sites will be taken. Our difficulties getting on the grid will become greater, and on and on and on. But storage, they say, we can solve our problems with the intermittency with storage. And we do that to a little degree with hydro pumps. And some places this is quite viable, in which case they pump energy up when it's available and pump water up when when the energy's available, and let it flow down when they need it, when it's not available. And that works. We have a dam in Alberta, Brazil, and there's some of that done at that site. But batteries are an opportunity. In Alberta, we have 9 now, with 41 new proposals to expand that. There are lots of different storage means, and this is an opportunity where the technology might be able to contribute in the future. So if we look at the large battery site in Europe, it comprises 200 acres, 200 megawatts, $150 million, and will supply the energy of a tanker truck filled with jet fuel. This is a rough comparison between the two. In Alberta, If we needed that 5 days, it would take over 1 million acres of batteries and cost us $1 trillion. But the cost of batteries have been declining, and hopefully new technology will make this really a viable option. But we should think of batteries completely independent of renewables. They have to survive on their own, and they got to be practical on their own. So batteries work on the arbitrage between buying low cost and selling at high cost. And that can be easily calculated. If we put in a battery that has a very limited cycle of 1,000, depending upon the particular type, maybe up to 2,000, and 2,000 cycles, and we know the cost that it's going to cost for the installation divided by 1,000, we can calculate very precisely what we're going to get per cycle. So it's going to need at least 25 cents or add 25 cents per kilowatt hour wholesale to the price. But keep in mind that this is an arbitrage of buying the very bottom and selling at the very top. What does it mean? It means it's not scalable, meaning the more battery plants you get installed, the more competition for the low, the more competition for the high, meaning that margin is going to shrink. There's a analysis on the web from a AI about the opportunity to install batteries and whether or not they are going to be cost effective. And the bottom line is, with a lot of blue sky assumptions, the payback is beyond the life of the battery. This is an example of Ontario Hydro, what they pay. And as you can see, they pay up to 50 cents per kilowatt hour for solar. That's a huge cost. That's wholesale. That's what they're buying it at. That's not what they're selling it to the customer at. Dunkelflauten, if we look at Germany, Dunkelflauten essentially means no wind, no sun. So we can see the radical difference between the installed capacity, what they are possibly capable of, and the amount that we actually get from it, which could be negligible and was negligible for a time last winter. This is what happened. When you fall into that zone of limited wind and solar, well, solar in the winter is non-existent, but wind, when you lose the wind as well, the price of electricity skyrockets. And you could see traditional sources up in the northern Europe around $10 and $170 in Germany. These are prices that are needed to be paid in order to buy the electricity because nothing was coming from renewables. This is a graph I've stolen from Bjorn Borg. It is a summation of the prices charged for electricity in the countries around the world. It is, so if we look at this, and I think this is definitive. This is not theory. This is not explanation. This is not a point or ideology. This is reality. So we see as the percentage of renewables or intermittents happens, the cost goes up. That's irrefutable. This is a capture of the reality of intermittence. And I hopefully given you a lot of explanation as to why this is so. Australia did an analysis again on the predictions on what happens if you cut coal, cut nuclear, cut gas, and the price just keeps going up. In Germany, if they're going to go to renewables, remember here that we have our grid, which is designed and charged and justified by distributing electrical energy everywhere and consistently and mostly full. But as soon as you start attaching renewables or intermittents, the capacity factor of our grid goes down and must be considered. So you're going to have a lot of capacity for the tsunami of energy that comes in and then nothing. And that grid has to be expanded and in some cases even doubled. And that's a huge cost. AESO has plans to accommodate 30%. That means we're going to struggle to get to 30%, avoid this transmission congestion, and a whole number of different factors are going to come into play. And we believe, or AESO believes, that they can achieve a 30% by 2030. But in order to get there, we will go into a negative grid. What's a negative grid? Well, it means that we have contracted for energy that we're not going to be able to use. That means we will have to either try and sell it off at a very heavy discount to Montana or our grids that are adjacent to us, and hopefully they can take it at a heavy discount if we give them enough incentive, or we're simply going to have to pay for it and not use it. I've heard this, we hope to have a time of 100% renewables. Well, that's scary to the grid operator because there's no base supply. There's no cheap energy. It all has to be charged and accounted for. There's a possibility of a negative grid in that a slight change in load or a slight increase in wind, and you get popped into a negative grid. Finally, there's no spinning reserve. How do you account for that? In Texas, we have just spinning mass. In Ireland, we just have spinning mass to keep for the stability of the grid. Spain, it's its first weekday of 100% renewable power on the grid. What does that mean? It means instantaneously at one moment during the day with the output of the renewables max, and we dropped the demand, and the two came to be equal at one moment of the day. And of course, that is subject of fanfare and promotion, except it crashed. Sanchez, their prime minister, said that the electrical system failed, was pointing out that it failed, and in 5 seconds. But they're going to consider all possible hypotheses. They're going to make sure it never happens again. This cost billions and billions of dollars. But there's no problem with the renewables. It's not the renewables' fault. But we're going to consider all possible hypotheses except the one that's probably causing it. Now, we've had a lot of experts weigh in on this. And I think universal, they point to the lack of spinning inertia. So this is kind of like my dad at 99 died of pneumonia. So they say he died of pneumonia, but he was 99. In reality, it's because he was old and he had a very, very weakened immune system. The same thing is going to happen here. They're going to say it's an atmospheric anomaly. It's going to be a factor that was the straw that broke the camel's back. But the bottom line is it will not be that. It will be the fragility of their grid because they did not have the spinning reserve. Our government has fit in with a lot of countries around the world to focus to try to get to net zero by 2035. But they're going to ignore a lot of different factors. It's going to be about accounting. I've already said AESO will be struggling to get to 30% by 2030, and that is with the low-hanging fruit and the best possible productivity and fitting into our grid. And they're going to want us to get the remaining 70%. And the way that we're going to get there is probably by ignoring a lot of the factors. So we know that our equipment and our economy is really structured around one of these basic principles. And that is, to give you an example, if we install or put in a dry cleaners into a local locality, it will maybe be quite profitable, quite beneficial to the environment, quite beneficial to the local economy, and easy to install, and it functions fine. The second one will experience more difficulty. It will be competing against the first one, and so on and so forth. But we will get to a point where we will get saturated, and the next dry cleaners that goes into that locale will make all of them dysfunctional, and all of them will no longer be viable. So this is going to be happening with our solar, certainly with our battery plants. The more we install, the more the batteries become, will lose their viability. And the difficulty of installing them and connecting them will be increasing. We have in Alberta targeted 1 million acres of these renewables. But after that, it becomes more and more difficult and problematic to bring in the next one. Alternative energy is right now it's working with subsidized and forced implementation. But there are no royalties, no taxes, no reclamation, but somehow they can call that sustainable. Our federal government pays a premium to provide clean energy to all our government offices. This is pretending, because I've already explained to you what the pool means. When energy comes in, it becomes part of the pool. There's no distinction between clean and and unclean. It's kind of like saying, well, if I take a bucket out of a sewage lagoon, it's clean because someone dumped a bucket of clean water at the other end. It's just pretending. And there's a lot of pretending that's going to be needed to make net zero work. In Canada, we have multiple carbon offset credits, and carbon credits are one of the things that's going on around the world. I kind of am reminded of Martin Luther and indulgences in that it's a way to extract money from the poor, to make them feel good, to make them morally obligated. And that's what these are about. So the person that gets to print off these certificates are going to get wealthy. Electricity net zero by 2035? Well, it's going to be increased cost, increased pricing. They're going to make it very expensive. We're going to be restricted in energy and a whole lot of pretending. Now, this is my opinion. This is not fact. This is my opinion. So it's about feeling good about alternative energy. And if you want to send me the money, I will send you a certificate to allow you to feel good. Obvious facts. If a source is intermittent, it cannot supply a continuous load on its own. And when there's no wind or sun, the entire alternate energy $1 trillion are simply dead capital burden to the grid. And not one gas turbine can be eliminated. Transitioning is not possible with our existing technology, in my view. So net zero is about pricing, rationing, and denying energy. And then they want to go to energy net zero. And everything we've talked about is electricity, which is only 10% of the energy used in Alberta, meaning we said ASO was struggling to get 30%, because that would be 3% of the total energy. And somehow we've got to work on the remaining 97% by 2050. Our Royal Bank said it's going to cost Canada $2 trillion. No, it's going to cost probably 2 or 3 times that. But we're going to be able to maybe show up on the impact of the climate change. This is based on the UN climate model. If we get to that net zero, we might have be able to show up on this graph. So wind solar scammers are wide, and I will leave you with, hopefully you attain some skepticism on all sides, because there's so much fairy dust out there. It's difficulty to see the reality of what is going on. We have our beliefs, and they are fortresses against the misinformation and the propaganda, but they have a back door. That back door is confirmation bias. So we need to be skeptical in all directions, but every fear is a wide open door. Let's be skeptical. Let's get involved. Let's be part of this conversation and this discussion. If you're not, you're simply going to be its victim.
Can you expand just a little bit on that deal about if you see a wind turbine spinning, it may or may not be generating electricity?
Yes. So just because it's spinning it doesn't necessarily mean that the wind is pushing torque on it, because those turbines, the amount of energy we get from that spinning turbine is entirely dependent upon the push of the wind. The blades are adjustable and will be positioned to capture the maximum amount of energy from the wind. And if the wind backs off for a bit, the turbine will continue to rotate. It has mass, it has inertia, even though there's no push from the wind. And we will even run that turbine as a motor, taking energy from the grid in order to keep it turning if it's going to be an intermittent or a gusty wind coming. And it's just a momentary pause in the wind that's blowing. So it'll continue to rotate, and it's no way of looking at the turbine without to know how much it's contributing, or if it is even contributing to the grid.
Actually, one other follow-up question. It seems common to me if I'm driving through Iowa that you can see a lot of turbines, and some of them are turning and some of them aren't. Do you think some of them are just not being maintained and they never turn, or what's going on there?
There's no room on the grid. Okay, so they not only need to have wind, and clearly if some of them are turning and some of them are not, it could be a maintenance problem as you described, but it's quite likely that there's just no spot on the grid and no demand for that energy, so they've turned them off. So the usability of that wind depends not just on the availability of the wind, but also the demand that we can fit it into our grid. So if we have our base energy that we've already contracted for and is already paid for, supplying all of the demand, there's no room on the grid for additional generation. And so we would shut them in and not bring them on. And so they would sit there and not be turning.
All right. Cliff Bryanton, thank you very much. I will let you go, but I hope to talk to you soon for part 2 of this, or another PowerPoint.
Oh, I would be very, very, very honored. Tom, I've watched your podcasts and learned a lot, and you've talked to some very interesting people, and I am honored and pleased to be with you here this morning. And at any time, I would also point out, and if you can fit this back in, if I went through a number of slides, that if someone has a question on those slides and did their own research on those slides, if they put their slide number and then their question, I will respond to that in their comments.
All right. That sounds great. Thanks again, Cliff Bryanton. Talk to you soon. Goodbye.
Okay. Thank you. Have a great day.